Hi everyone, this is Corey Hill at the Partnership for People with Disabilities at Virginia Commonwealth University. Welcome to our December Talks on Tuesday. This is part 2. We did the first part in November, and our session is the decision tree, a tool for teaming and a tool for teaming and family engagement. So thank you for joining us. Our presenters today are Kyla Patterson from the State Part C office and Lisa Terry, who is also my colleague at the Partnership for People with Disabilities at VCU. So Kyla and Lisa, thank you for sharing your expertise. I'm going to turn this over to you now. Thank you.
Thanks, Corey. This is Kyla Patterson. I am the Early Intervention Team Leader at the Infant and Toddler Connection of Virginia State Office. I'm really just here as a resource today to help with questions and that sort of thing. Lisa is going to be our primary presenter, so I'm going to turn it over to her.
Thanks, Kyla. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Terry, and I am an Early Intervention Professional Development Consultant at VCU with the Partnership for People with Disabilities, which is always a mouthful to say. And Kyla is exactly correct. So today what we're going to do is we are going to cover some scenario-based practice with the decision tree and have some discussion around some of the common questions associated with its use. But first, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everybody who submitted comments, questions, and scenarios after the first Talks on Tuesday. I am going to answer questions from what was submitted using 2 specific scenarios today. In these scenarios, we were going to first meet Marco, who is a 24-month-old displaying some atypical social emotional skills. And then next, we will look at Amara, who is a 23-month-old with concerns based on the MCHAT, as well as her parents who also have expressed some concerns. Additionally, keep an eye out for an extended learning email that will be coming soon and include a new scenario-based learning bite as well as a blog post. So now let's talk about the child outcome summary process. And over here, if you can watch the chat box, Jeannie is going to post some of the tools for success that we have. Thank you, Jeannie. And the first one is really going to be, sorry, somebody said it sounds like I'm fading in and out. So I'm not sure if anyone else is having any of those issues. Just Corey said, make sure that your speakers are muted, and I will make sure I'm close to the phone as well. But let me know if you have any other issues. Okay, so some of the ways that you want to be successful during the implementation of the decision tree is to rely on some kind of resources to really help you support you in gathering some information and just planning for just the discussion in the 3 child outcome areas. So the first one is the functional assessment examples of questions to ask families. And this tool, it really will help you gather just rich information across all settings and situations, which is really essential when you're using the decision tree and you're kind of following the flow chart to make sure that you are having quality, rich, individualized information for each child across all settings and situations. And another resource that I used was the Assessment for Service Planning Notes template. And this is something that I use as a provider just to kind of help organize my thoughts and ensure that I was covering information and routines as well as the 3 outcome areas. I also, when I was a service coordinator, I used this tool, and it kind of just helped make sure that it was like a checks and balance to make sure that everything was covered thoroughly. And as we all know, it's really easy to just miss things when there's a lot going on in the process and in the environment as well. So I just found this tool because I'm a visual learner, so I found it to be very beneficial. And finally is the definition of functional assessment, and this will give you an idea of some of the key concepts. So thank you again to Jeannie for posting those into the chat box. So next, let's look at what each outcome area encompasses. One thing that was really hard for me was really just getting out of that mindset of thinking about domains. So transitioning to thinking more about the functional development in the 3 outcome areas versus language, social, or gross motor. And explaining functional development when you're talking to caregivers, it's a lot easier if you kind of understand how each area or what things go in each area and how to explain it better to them and what we expect typically in that area. So it's kind of like the how factor, like how is a child feeding himself? Like what does it look like? Can I visualize it? How is your child telling you what he wants? So let's start first with social emotional skills, including social relationships. So here we're really thinking about relationships in the child's world with his caregivers, with other adults and other children. And this includes the child's awareness, their shared attention, affective engagement, their attachment to their caregivers, and their social language. And their social language is really going to be based on their age. And this can include things like calling family members by name, greeting other people, participating in songs, or taking turns. There is a level of how the child is able to handle their emotions and then communicate their feelings. Next is acquiring and using knowledge and skills, including early language and communication. So this outcome is all about how the child's learning, which can be impacted by their memory, their attention, problem solving, thinking, and imitation. It also includes the child's language and how they are understanding, and then showing us what they understand. And finally is the use of appropriate behaviors to meet needs. So this outcome is all about how the child's moving towards independence, right? So how he navigates around his environment and communicates to get his needs met. So those routines like feeding, sleeping, and dressing, those all naturally progress as a child learns to take care of himself. And this is also going to include how the child follows directions about safety. So what I'm going to ask you to do next is to go ahead and pull out your decision tree and your scenario handout, because we are going to work through these scenarios, and it may be helpful for you to have it in front of you, as well as if you want to take some notes of specific examples, as we are going to recall and apply this information in chat later as we move along the decision tree. So again, go ahead and pull those out if you have them. Jeannie just posted them in the chat box. Thank you, Jeannie. And if you could print them out. So note on these scenarios that I am adding the developmental ages. I know there are some systems that discuss age levels in the developmental domains before they summarize the child's functioning compared to same age peers. Some might do it after. Some may do it in a more integrated way, but when we're thinking about the decision tree, we're really thinking about what peers this age typically do, right? But the developmental ages, they do not impact the decision tree statements. And so you're going to specifically see that in the first scenario with Marco today, where Marco is not functionally using his skills across all settings and situations. And really, in my experience, like I review the ages and then we discuss the child's functioning because it's going to be on the IFSP. And I want to provide time for parents to ask those questions if needed. And I know in regards to the actual decision tree discussion, I'm sure you're all thinking like, goodness, this can take more time. However, this is really something that you're just going to naturally integrate in your discussion of the assessment results. So it may take more time initially until you kind of find like your flow and your groove and you start to feel more comfortable with the discussion. I set up the scenarios today in a way to really help you kind of visualize it in the assessment for service planning process. It's not two separate discussions, rather it's just one cohesive discussion when you're emphasizing the child's strengths and their areas of growth. So let's move on to Marco. So pull out your Marco handout, and I'm going to kind of pretend I'm the service coordinator, and everyone participating today, you guys are going to kind of act as my team, as if we're having this conversation with the family. So something I would say to the family is, I would tell them first, we're going to discuss Marco's social-emotional skills, including social relationships. And this area really involves how Marco's interacting with you, his grandparents, his siblings, others in the community, and how he's communicating those feelings. And so just to pause, and I know that I'm getting ready to start reading the scenario, and this is a lot of information. So again, I just encourage you to take notes as I read the scenario. So let's look at Marco. So Marco likes to stay near his parents. Today, Marco stayed near his mother's legs. He avoided looking towards anyone except his mom. He engaged if his mom facilitated an activity. Marco has been attending childcare for a month, and his mom expressed concerns about his adjustment. The teachers expressed concerns to his mom because he cries throughout the day and cannot calm himself from the moment she drops him off. He wants to stay near one of the teachers, Anna, throughout the day. He calls for Anna when he is upset. When other adults try to engage Marco, he turns his head or focuses on the toy he's holding. He does not participate in circle time with other kids and walks around the room or watches from a distance. He plays alongside his peers for outdoor play. When his mom takes him to the park, he plays well with older kids chasing behind them. In unfamiliar settings like the grocery store, Marco's mom describes him as anxious. His parents prefer to avoid taking him out in the community. At home, he will call his mom and dad to get their attention. He laughs and plays with his dad. His mom engages him in sit-down activities, and he sings parts of songs. He cries during transition to different activities unless it involves helping to clean up. He loves to help wipe the table and pretends with his toy vacuum. At home, Marco will defend ownership of his toys and say no while holding on to them in his hand. At school, Marco will let kids take things from him. So coming up, Marco will engage with all his teachers and participate in activities alongside his peers. Marco will begin to sing songs during story time with his peers. He will calm down when redirected by his teacher. Okay, so what we're going to do next on this slide is we are going to use the age-expected development reference for scenarios. So that was another handout that you guys received. And it's going to just kind of serve as a visual support because this is something similar to what I would tell the family. Okay, so again, I'm going to act as if I'm the service coordinator going through this discussion. And you guys will act as my team. And so when we get to the prompts of let's think about some examples, that's when I'm going to ask you to type into chat. So, ITC, when you asked us coming up mean goals. No, so that's just me saying what's coming up in that area for his development. So what could we expect to come up next? Okay, so let's look at this decision tree together. As we mentioned before, we use this to come up with a statement that best fits Marco's functional development compared to other kids his age. So first we're going to ask, does Marco ever function in ways that would be considered age expected with regards to this outcome? So we're going to pause here because when we ask this question, we don't expect that parents necessarily know what's age expected. So we want to give them some information. So that's where you can use your handout to follow along. And this is something that I would say, at 24 months old, we know in this area, kids really begin to show an interest watching and playing alongside other children. They love to check in with their parents and be near them. They use names to call those familiar to them. They still have a hard time controlling their feelings and response when they're upset, but they can calm in a reasonable amount of time. They want to help around the house. They begin to pretend with toys and objects. No or mine, that may become their favorite word. So here's where we're going to go ahead and pause, and let's think of some examples that Marco is doing in this outcome. So this is where I'm going to ask you all to type into the chat box. So list some examples in the chat box, and the chat is found above your name. And you can just go ahead and start typing in. So what did you hear about Marco's interactions with others? What about his ability to calm and helping around the house? So let's start typing in some examples of things that we're doing. So he likes to be near his parents and checks in regularly. Yes, absolutely. He claims ownership of toys. Yep, so he's claiming ownership of toys more at home than at school, right? He calls adults by name for their attention, imitates household chores. Yes, he loves cleaning. He'll say no at home, and he calls for his teacher, Anna. He likes to help clean and pretend with his vacuum. He says names to get his parents' attention. Yep, he checks in with his parents. He's saying his names. He likes to play with older children outside. Yes, so at the park, he's following them around, right? So great feedback. So here, when we're thinking about this, let me get my pointer tool back. Okay, so when we're thinking about this, we're going to ask, does Marco ever function in ways that would be considered age expected with regard to this outcome? So yes, right? So we identified that he does have some age-expected skills in this area. So we are going to consider statements 4 to 7. So the next question that we're going to ask is the child showing age-expected functional skills in all aspects of this outcome and across all settings and situations? So again, let's pause, and I'm going to ask you guys to type into the chat box again and give some examples of what Marco is doing. So what differences do you see across all settings and situations? How does he handle separation compared to other kids his age? So go ahead and type into the chat box as if you were part of the team and you were contributing some feedback. He cries during transition. Yes, transitions are hard for him. He has difficulty separating from mom at child care drop-off. Yes, and he cries throughout his day once his mom drops him off, right? He's unable to calm during drop-off. He can't calm himself. He does himself soothe at child care. He cries and often from separation from his family. He cries throughout the school day. Grocery store, yes, it's a stressful time. Parents do not even want to take him out. They prefer to avoid taking him out in the community. He has one primary caregiver at child care that he likes to stay with throughout the day. He's not participating. He doesn't defend his play. At school, he just lets the kids take things from him, right? He's not participating in circle time. It's hard to soothe in transitions. He's using some possessive words at home, but not at child care, right? So we're really starting to see a difference at child care and at home. So when we're looking at this question and we're asking, is the child showing age-expected functional skills in all aspects of this outcome and across all settings and situations? Here, again, we could say no, right? So let's continue down the decision tree. So next, what we want to know is to what extent is a child using age-expected skills across settings and situations? So again, it's going to prompt us to let's think of some examples. So I'm going to ask you guys again to go ahead and to type into the chat box. So let's think of some examples together. How is Marco's attachment to his parents? What do we see across all settings and situations? What settings? What situations? People are typing. He's playful with his dad. He participates in activities with his mom when he's at home. Yes, so at home he is participating. He calls for mom and dad to get their attention at home. He calls for his teacher, Anna, at school. He appears to function well at home, but when he's at the grocery store or childcare, he has a hard time. He has a favorite adult, and he's most comfortable with in both situations. Yes, absolutely. He likes to help clean up and pretend to vacuum. And he's using skills at home and not at childcare, right? And his parents did say they don't even like taking him out in the community, right? Because he really does have a hard time. So when we're looking at this question, to what extent is the child using age-expected skills across settings and situations? I think, again, we know that he's having a hard time, right, in those social settings. So it's really something that we want to think about. And it just, at home he does great, but it doesn't extend outside of that. So because of this, we really would probably say Marco shows occasional use of some of those age-expected skills or only some aspects of the skills. So here we're going to go ahead and continue down the decision tree. And so here's where we chose some age-expected skills. So this is kind of like the point in the conversation where I would check in with the family and make sure that we're all in agreement. I would give the parents an opportunity if they had any questions or they wanted me to clarify anything, or if they had any other feedback that they wanted to give. And in this outcome area, this is where we would say that Marco shows occasional use of some age-expected skills. He has more skills of a younger child in this area. Now, just a comment, because I know that people sometimes have a hard time with the occasional use versus the many age-expected, so statements 4 or 5. And the point would really just make sure that you're getting closer to either of these options versus being at the other end of the spectrum. And when we're kind of thinking of how frequently or how often, really thinking about all those different situations and settings that we're looking at those skills. And when we looked at Marco, he only was showing those skills when he was at home, right? So anytime he was outside of the home, he was starting to appear anxious, and at childcare, he just had a harder time. So that's where we landed on occasional use. And as I stated earlier, the developmental ages, they do not impact the decision tree discussion. In Marco's case, he was only showing atypical social emotional development, right? So the discussion of those specific examples, it really led us to conclude that he shows occasional use of some age-expected skills. Okay, so what happens if the parents disagree with your decision, and who gets the final decision? So that's a great question, and I think when you kind of want to plan for providing as much information to the parents, and that's really why when we kind of start the discussion with them, we kind of talk about, well, this is what happens at 24 months. This is what we would expect. And so I think sometimes when parents don't really understand or they're disagreeing, it's because they don't always have enough information to make a decision. But when you're giving those examples and you're giving specific examples across all those settings and situations, I think that kind of helps them kind of agree and start to fall in line, and they start to give their own examples as well. And so I think a lot of it is kind of what we do prior to that, how we're gathering information, how much rich information that we're gathering, and that's why I kind of provided some of those resources early on. And so the more information you have, the more specific examples that you have, and then just informing the family of what we would expect at this age is really beneficial. Okay, so next we're going to move to little Amara, and we're going to discuss how Amara acquires and uses knowledge and skills, including her early language communication. So this is really like how Amara is learning, right? How she's problem solving, how she's remembering things. And a big component is how she's using her language to show us what she's understanding, which I know is one of your biggest areas of concern mentioned at the intake by you. And usually that's kind of where I'll reference if the parent said what their biggest concern is, I'll kind of note it in whichever area once we get to it. Okay, so again, I'm going to read the scenario for Amara. Please take notes, and this will help as we list some examples. Okay, so Amara learns primarily by mouthing toys and using her hands. She mouths unfamiliar toys. She enjoys playing with her Mega Blocks, putting them in and out of the box. She does not always look at the pieces as she is playing with them. Amara also loves any toys that produce sound and watching animated television shows. She loves movement activities like spinning with her dad and playing hide and seek with her mom. Amara's frustration can interrupt her learning. For example, she likes to line her farm animals but begins to throw the toys when they fall. Amara's mom stated she does not always seem to enjoy playing with the toys, and the only way to make her laugh is to tickle her. Amara was observed turning pages in a book and starting to point at random pictures on the page. Amara's dad stated pointing in books is new. They read to her every night before bed. Amara's mom added they have noticed Amara does not move her mouth as much as her cousin, who is her age. She tries to imitate something she sees her cousin doing when outside, like going down the slide on her tummy. Her mom describes Amara as lacking awareness around her the majority of the time. Amara's only word is all for ball. She uses the sign for eat, more, and please. Amara was heard babbling using some consonant sounds during play, B's, W's, C's, and all vowel sounds. Amara is building her understanding of language and not yet following directions given by her parents. So coming up, Amara will point to pictures and objects to let her parents know that she understands the names for them. She will start to use more sounds and put them together to make words. Amara will explore her toys in her home more by looking at them during play. Okay. So let's start going through Amara's scenario. So on this slide again, we're going to use the age expected development reference for scenarios as a visual support during this webinar. So that's where I'm providing the information for the family on kind of like what we would expect at this age. Okay, so I would tell the parents, so let's look at the decision tree together. As we mentioned before, we use this to kind of come up with a statement that best fits Amara's functional development compared to other kids her age. So first, we're going to ask, does Amara ever function in ways that would be considered age expected with regard to this outcome? Again, at 24 months old, we know in this area that kids have about 50 words. They begin to put phrases together and imitating words you say. They follow simple directions like going to get something. When reading, they begin to point and name pictures. Their attention is increasing, and imitation is seen throughout their day in play and using sounds and words. So here, let's think of some examples of what Amara is doing in this outcome. So again, this is where I'm going to ask you to use your chat box and go ahead and start typing some examples that you would say during this discussion. So how is she communicating what she's understanding, and how is she learning? And thank you, Jeannie, for posting that age-expected reference. She has some signs and one word. Yep, she says all for ball. She's practicing some speech sounds. She finds 3 words. She is learning orally. She likes to mouth her toys. She points to pictures to let her parents know she understands the meaning of them. She imitates her cousin. She's starting to point to pictures in the book. Yeah, and so that was something very new. She's learning by mouthing, imitating some things that she sees her cousin do in play. Yep, she's going down the slide on her belly. Her play is like a younger child throws, mouths, puts in and out, playing hide and seek with mom, and she doesn't know how to follow directions. Right, so when we look at this question, we asked, excuse me, does a child ever function in ways that would be considered age expected with regard to this outcome? So, and you guys listed some great examples that she has she has one word, few signs, she's mouthing toys, she's babbling throughout her day, she's not following directions. So when we look at this question, does Amara ever function in ways that would be considered age expected with regard to this outcome? We would say no, right? So we are going to consider statements 1 to 3. And just to pause and note that even though we decided to say no, that we really still identified a discussion of things that Amara is doing. So you guys were able to identify that she's imitating her cousin, that she has a word, and that she has a few signs, right? So we are still looking at some of the things that Amara is doing, even though you may think that this could be a very negative conversation. So using the decision tree with families, it doesn't have to really require us to lose our strengths-based focus. It's just going to ensure that what we're talking about is very balanced and it's a complete discussion about how Amara is functioning compared to those same age peers, right? Okay, so the next question is Amara using functional skills that are close to age expected functioning? So again, let's pause and let's think of some examples of what Amara is doing in this area. So go ahead and type into your chat box. So let's think about what type of play excites her. How is she communicating? She likes movement. Yep, she loves playing with her dad. She loves movement activities, playing hide and seek. She's using a few signs to communicate. She likes her animated shows and toys, right, too. She likes toys with sound that have some kind of sound component. She likes putting her mega blocks right in and out. She's starting to point. She likes sounds and animation. Yep, so I think you guys are hitting all of that. So when we're thinking about this question, is the child using functional skills that are close to age expected functioning? So when we're thinking about some of these examples, like when she only laughs when she's getting tickled, right? She doesn't appear to enjoy her toys. She's got some of those very basic levels of beginning play skills. She's starting to babble and use some signs. And so again, we'd say no, right? And so let's continue down the decision tree. So as we go down in this outcome, we all agree that she has very early skills in this area. And this means that Amara has the skills that we would expect from a much younger child. And again, this is kind of where I would pause and I would check in with the parents and see if they have any additional comments or questions. Now, I would caution you guys to not just read the statements. So I know that before this decision tree, like for example, like I relied heavily on the statement outcome card that just had the statements. And so when you actually just read the statements, you might kind of think, well, why wouldn't it be a 2, right? Because 2 is child is beginning to show some of the early skills that are necessary for development of more advanced skills in this area. And so let's go back and to the previous slide to the question that got us to statement 1. And so the question was, is Amara using functional skills that are close to age expected functioning? And when we kind of held the discussion and we were talking about how Amara participates in that in and out of play, she's babbling throughout her day. We know that at this age, we would expect kids to have about 50 words, right? And start putting phrases together, imitating sounds and play, and they follow those simple directions, naming objects in their environment. And so when we ask this question, if she is using those functional skills that are close to age expected, that's where we can answer no based on that information. And it is important to kind of utilize the questions and those examples, those very specific examples too, and kind of the flow of the decision tree to kind of help with that. So how long has it taken you to complete this process with families for all 3 indicators? I would say because it's something, I think as you can kind of see, it's something that you kind of naturally integrate when you're talking about it and you're reporting out with the family. But I mean, I would say it's no longer than like 5-10 minutes. It's a very, quick conversation as you're kind of thinking about it and pausing. But it's something that you're already doing, and so you can already recall like how we kind of already, when I was reading that scenario, that's the information I would have already given the parents. So recalling that information is very easy to do. Now, I know also that this can be a very uncomfortable conversation when a child's statement shows very early skills, and it's really one of those like conversations you can't really avoid, but it is helpful to kind of explain the development of peers with age to give parents a thorough understanding as we ask these questions. Because parents who may have that difference of opinion about their child's level of functioning, it's just maybe due to the lack of understanding, and thinking about those specific examples is beneficial to kind of add to that discussion. And really, when you think about it, in Amara's case, her parents seem to already be aware that she is behind, right? Because she was comparing Amara to her cousin. And so sometimes I think our own discomfort, it comes from, of course, not wanting to hurt the parents, but they probably already know to some extent. And although we may still feel uncomfortable, these are one of those conversations that we hold. And I always think, I'm like, you know, like, it's not my decision what information, it's not up to me to decide what information I give the families or don't give. It's up to me to give that information to the families, and then they decide what they want to do with that information. Which actually takes us to our next topic, and that is courageous conversations. So we are going to use your raise your hand feature. So raise your hand is over, it's the third box to the right under your name. And what I'm going to ask you to do is raise your hand if you get like a bit uncomfortable when you're discussing the child outcome summary statement or the developmental ages with a family whose child may have the skills expected of a much younger child. And again, the raise your hand is under your participant name. It's the third box, and it's a little hand icon. Yep, so I see lots of hands going up, right? And of course we feel that way, right? Because no one wants to add to a family's worries about their child. And it's important to be honest, though, and share that complete information with parents and families, because we are about to ask these families to make decisions about the outcomes that they want for their child and their family, and to really plan for the services that are going to address those outcomes. So the courageous conversation is necessary. But I want to get some tips from you guys. So how do you prepare for that? So I want you to use your chat box and give some strategies. How would you prepare to have those kind of courageous conversations? What are some strategies that you use to prepare yourself for that kind of conversation? And I see some people typing. I'm sure you guys have some really good resources and strategies. You review their strengths, right? Absolutely. So really focusing on those strengths and talking about them and finding out what are they doing. Emphasize the strengths of the child. Yep. Rehearse it in my head. Yes. Sometimes, you know, it's so silly to like practice things, but sometimes even practicing how you're having this conversation with the family and how you're saying things and how you feel comfortable using the decision tree and asking those questions and the prompts for discussing some examples is really helpful. Using the same words that parents are using to talk about their child, similar vocabulary, yeah. So pulling off of what the parents are saying. Mentally list the strengths before having the conversation. Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of you are doing it in your head. Writing a narrative that clearly states what their strengths are and what their needs are so that it doesn't come back as a shock when I'm explaining the child outcome ratings. Yeah, so you have a balance, right? So you're showing their strengths and their areas of growth. Distinguish the areas of concern between positives and strengths. And optimism and explaining how children grow and develop at different rates, right? We know that about child development. They do grow at different rates. When sharing results about development, start to talk about it even before you get to the cost, the child outcome summary process. Yeah, so you're kind of slowly embedding it. I know some people start talking about it at intake. I remind myself that by having a difficult conversation up front will help the parent access the services they really need earlier, right? You know, there was this family that I used to work with, and I always thought about this family as planting seeds. And she had a child that was, you know, severely delayed, needed a lot of support and equipment, too, to really help that child participate in their care. And you could visually see, you know, that the child was delayed by looking at them. And the parent, she just did not want anything. She didn't want to accept anything. And she wasn't ready for that, you know. And so it wasn't that, you know, I made the choice to never say anything to her. It was, I kind of looked at it as planting seeds slowly along the way until she was ready. Sometimes parents have to hear it, you know, and then when they're ready to accept it, we're there. And explain what they should expect to see next. Yep. Nonverbal language, read the parent's cues, sit face-to-face, respectful eye contact. Yes. Absolutely. I think that's so important just to be mindful and aware of what we're doing and the kind of vibe that we're giving off to the parents, right? I think sometimes even when we are feeling uncomfortable, it can easily show in our nonverbal cues too. Acknowledging with the parent that we are all there because of an identified delay, and this tool just helps us to measure a child's progress and development toward more age-expected growth, right? So why are we having this conversation? There is a reason for it. And acknowledging the parent's feelings, yes, absolutely, and checking in with those parents. Start with a personal understanding and belief that the information shared is not meant to harm the family or parent, but it's meant to enhance their understanding and strengthen their capacity to help their child develop in a meaningful way. So you're leading with those strengths and you're providing solutions. Using reflective listening, yes, I love where you're thinking about that. Reflective listening to validate the parent's experience response to information. Yes, and I always say that during assessments, you know, especially too, this may be like the 100th assessment that we've done in, you know, the past few months, but this is the family's first time. So although like it's a process in our head and we're kind of like go because we know what's coming next to anticipate, but being mindful of the parent and respecting them and checking in and using that reflective, active listening with them. Yes, absolutely. So recap what the service coordinator already learned at intake so the parents don't have to repeat the same information and ask about any changes, right? And I love, you know, skill building too and practicing that. If you have access to a counselor or a psychologist that you might work with in your agency, maybe have them come out too and do like a training on how to have these courageous conversations. And talking to other families that may have been in the program to kind of find out what they found helpful. There is a video that's available on the resources handout, and it's an interview with a parent about their perspective on the child outcome summary process. So thank you, Jeannie, for posting that. So there's a link for it right there. But that's a quick video that you can kind of take a look just to get the family's perspective. So now we're going to talk about the difference of opinions in teams. And one of the things that I really like about the decision tree is it kind of helps to ensure that everyone's really on the same page because everyone's going through this process and thinking of these examples together. And I think that sometimes people are really like afraid to disagree when really disagreements, they can be a gateway to helping you think in other ways or understanding things differently. It doesn't have to be viewed as something negative because if we can respect everyone has a different perspective and a different opinion and a different view, that really can help enlighten us to look at things differently ourselves sometimes too, right? So one way to really help with the differing opinions is just to kind of discuss those specific examples when prompted. I think when you don't have those specific examples, you want to try to make sure you're gathering that information and you're really asking good, open-ended questions embedded within the routines and you're kind of diving in deeper because everyone does have something to add. And if you're like me, you may not always remember everything because I've had a lot of kids. For those that personally know me, I've had a lot of kids, and so my memory isn't always the best, but I don't always remember everything, but it is helpful hearing another team member just kind of bring up something specific, like a specific example, like when, you know, when he's out at the grocery store or in the community that he has a hard time or has meltdowns, because I might have forgot that piece of it. And I really can't, like, stress enough the importance of just following the flow of the decision tree. Not only just for the family engagement, but to me, it's really just a visual prompt to kind of help guide the process. And when you try to follow it in your head, which I've done several times before, but it really does, it leaves room for error in your own decision-making process because then you can have room for those misunderstandings across team members. And so, again, just, you know, following the flow, using it as a visual prompt is so helpful. So again, so what kind of strategies are you guys using? So type into the chat, like, how do you help reach consensus on the child outcome summary statement? How do you make sure that, you know, that your opinions and that your teaming is unified? So go ahead and type into chat what suggestions or strategies that you have found to be successful with teams. A couple people typing. So you reiterate the examples, yeah. And I think you saw that sometimes our examples were similar in some of the different prompts, and that's okay because you're really talking about them and bringing them up again. Set up the situation at the start as a team discussion and make sure all team members are joining in, right? And I think, whoever is facilitating the conversation, like if you feel like, like maybe you didn't get as much feedback from, Sally, who is a speech therapist, and you want some more specific feedback from her, then ask her, too. Or maybe, maybe Marco's mother didn't join in the conversation as much, and you want to see if she has any other specific examples. And so you can just ask her, is there anything specific that you want to add? Sometimes I think when you have a room full of people, too, they don't want to overtalk somebody else. And so sometimes just giving them the opportunity can be very enlightening. Let's see, case scenario practice among team members when not with a family to build our skills and comfort. Yes, so that's what you're doing prior, which we talked about at the first talks on Tuesday too. What you do prior and what you do after the meetings is so essential, and that helps people get a little bit more comfortable with it and make sure everyone's aligned on the same page. Review the team's knowledge about the child before the meeting. Yes, so making sure that you're looking at all those intake notes. Using parent words when talking about the outcomes, their concerns, and the routines. Yep, so using their specific language that you've heard them say, and it helps them feel more validated too, right? And making sure everyone has shared understanding and meaning, and using decision tree activities at staff meetings to build that interrater reliability and practice discussing differing opinions. Yes, and one of the things that we did today was we used a scenario-based practice scenario, and that's something and that you guys will receive a new one that's going to be in the form of a learning bite that you can take back to your team meetings and practice as well. So great, thank you. Yep, and I told you for myself I need a visual guide, so I make sure for me I write down the examples so when it's time I can easily share them. Okay, so how do you ensure consistency when teams are always inconsistent? So this is probably very true in large areas. So I would love to hear from some of those systems. Maybe you do have set systems though, but maybe you had somebody that was filling in and you've never met them before, and so you're not really quite sure. So how would you do that? How would you ensure that consistency even if you don't have those set teams? So go ahead and type into chat. Train service coordinators. Yep. So I'm thinking that you're thinking that you would have the service coordinators be the ones that facilitate the conversation. Yep. And so service coordinators are all at the same point, so they could facilitate the conversation, but they could also model it too. So I think modeling implementation is huge, especially for people to be able to see how it's implemented until they're starting to feel comfortable. Watching each other's cues, so you're paying attention to everybody that's in the room because everybody is part of that team, right? Maybe you can share with the team how you've done it with other teams prior to the meeting with the family and ask how they are comfortable conducting the conversation with the family. Yes, that's a great, just kind of checking in with the team and seeing where they're at and what they feel comfortable with. And, and then maybe that's where you might take the opportunity to model it for them. Like, what does it look like when you're facilitating that discussion and you're really modeling the implementation of the decision tree? Ongoing in-services to staff and group meetings, discussion ahead of time about how it will go. Yes, practice together, write down the conversation, similar to the coaching logs and analyze it. I think, you guys are identifying some great ways to really just make sure that everybody's on the same page. And so I think that was one of the real reasons we kind of emphasized making sure that the decision tree is on the table at the first talks on Tuesday. Meeting with assessment teams periodically to discuss and practice. Yeah, so sometimes just checking in, right? Like, how's it going? What's working? What's not working? Allowing a therapist who works with in discipline a family's main concern to leave the session, and the other therapists supplement and assist. Everyone has a different workflow, and you need to be flexible. I agree, yeah. So finding what really fits for your system. Something to think about, why is your team always inconsistent? Yeah, so kind of doing some of that own self-reflection, like why do we always have those inconsistent teams? What needs to happen within the system? So that's a different way of looking at it. So I know we got a lot of questions for videos, right? People want videos. And there are videos that are available now at the EXO website. So I'm not sure if you guys were able to get a chance to see these after the first talks on Tuesday, but please feel free to go to the EXO Center and access their video library. They have tons of videos there. And also, we are always looking to video the use of the decision tree. So if you are interested, if your team is interested and willing, please feel free to email me and one of our professional development team members. They will just come out. It's not very formal. It's, we might just be using our phones, but it's an informal process, and we would love to do it. Can you type this link in the thread? Let's see. Jeannie, can you get the EXO Center in the thread, please? Perfect. They will get it in just a minute. It's coming. Okay. So in the first talks on Tuesday, we kind of checked in with you guys to see how you were feeling about using the decision tree. And we talked a lot about teaming. We talked about family participation and provided scenario-based examples. But I want to go ahead and do another check-in as we finish this two-part webinar on the decision tree, just to see how people are feeling about it now. So we're going to use the pointer tool. So again, that's the vertical toolbar to the right of the chat box, and it's the second one. You'll see a starburst, you'll see a hand, an arrow, a happy face, a check mark, an X, and just pick one of these and drop it on how you're feeling. If you're like, yikes, I'm not sure this is a good idea, or, okay, I feel okay about this, or yay, I love the idea of engaging families in this discussion. Great. So it looks like, you guys are starting to feel a little bit more confident implementing this. So if, you're still kind of unsure, you're still having some questions, we're going to go ahead and move to the question section. And feel free, Kyla and I will answer your questions as needed. So type your questions in the chat box. And while you're typing, just to let you know that a new resource is coming soon. Yay! The Child Indicators booklet is being revised. It's going to be called the Child Outcomes Booklet, and it's going to be released by the end of December. So let's see. So we have our first question: is the decision tree in Spanish yet? So Kyla, do you want to answer that?
Sure. I was typing and I wasn't very fast. So it is not quite ready yet in Spanish, but we still expect that coming soon. And as soon as I have an updated timeline on that, I will let you know.
Perfect. Thanks, Kyla. Okay. Another question, will the language on the decision tree meet third grade reading level? So Kyla, do you have a response for that?
We're not planning at this point to make any changes to the wording on the decision tree. Again, it's not something we expect that you're handing to a family to read and process and use themselves. And so our expectation, just like with procedural safeguard forms and a number of other things that we give to families, is that it's about providing a copy to the family. That's important, but that's not without being paired with an explanation and support from the service coordinator or other providers.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is, how long did the process take for your team to make it work cohesively with family engagement to feel comfortable? Honestly, I think for people to feel comfortable, the more I think it matters what we do before and what we do after. So having those meetings and having that ability to practice and actually go through it, you could always take copies of people's IFSPs, have them bring it and kind of go through the decision tree together too. But that helps. And I am a big fan of like skill building, so practicing what we're going to say. That's how I trained a lot of like my new service coordinators and educators before. And it was something that clearly they did not feel comfortable doing at first, but they started to feel more comfortable once they kind of practiced it more. And so that was really the whole purpose of it. Okay, so great question. Would it work to tell parents what should be expected of a child that age, then read narratives, then do the decision tree so as to not be repeating information? Yeah, and I think that you could do it, you know, whatever you think works for you. I mean, that was just how I did it. But you could definitely, you know, start with in the beginning before. You could say this is kind of what we would expect of children this age, and then go into your narrative and saying, you know, this is what Amara is doing and what we're seeing and what you are kind of describing, and then you can kind of go back to it. I think you'd have to see what the parents like recall is like and seeing if they're able to kind of remember all of that information after receiving the information from the narrative too. And so maybe just bringing up some points again if they don't always remember that. Can provide the revised name for the booklet. Yep, the booklet will be called the Child Outcomes Booklet. So that will be coming out again at the end of December. Oh, thank you, Corey. It is very high level reading. We've been told that families should be left with the sheet. You know, I think kind of like what you saw, how I implemented it today, like it could be harder for some families to understand, but it's all about our explanation. And it's really just a guide. And so as we're going through it, we're going to kind of change our terminology to match the parents and to match their understanding. And then we're going to check in with them to make sure that they have an understanding. And so I think, you know, giving those examples sometimes too, it helps it relate a little bit. And Kyla, if you have anything about they've been told that families should be left with the sheet?
Yeah, I don't know that we've specifically said that. I think it's absolutely appropriate for a family to have a copy of that sheet. But again, I would equate it to when we leave them with a procedural safeguards document, which we are required to leave with them. But again, you know, in the practice manual and other places, we talk about providing them with a copy and an explanation of that document. And I would view this very much the same way.
Perfect. So thank you everyone so much for joining us. If you have any other questions, feel free to type them in. And thank you again for joining us. Kyla, do you have any last minute statements, or Corey?
No, I didn't have anything to add.
No, I think we're good. You'll see that Jeannie has put the survey in the chat. You also will get a survey after in your email. As a reminder, Talks on Tuesdays does take a winter break in January because it always hits right near the New Year's holiday. So we will be seeing you all back for February, March. Thank you all.
Wonderful. Thank you.